The weapon was not needed. Now, let's look at what the Heisei era has taught us thus far. We are trapped in a world that is at war, and can destroy itself at any second. Bioengineering is yet another field of science that, while beneficial, can be pushed to unethical extremes, and the loss of a loved one never stops bearing on one's heart. How can humanity exist in the same world as flowers? The nationalistic past of Japan is flimsy, and nothing to build a new country on. The hope of Japan leading the future is destroyed by its past returning in the form of Godzilla and destroying a country that took decades to build in mere days. The environment is in danger of human exploitation, but this destruction of the environment by the rich will have dire consequences on the whole population. But maybe if we don't act profit-driven, like the main character's daughter, who's not yet ingrained into the capitalist mindset, we can still save ourselves, as she never sees the cosmos as a way to make a profit, and when they are freed, the destruction of Mothra ends. We are not so different from nature. We are part of it, and we share many of the same goals as any other animal. Yet at the same time, we are incomprehensibly small in the face of nature, and we must accept that. Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. At the end of the day, love wins over hate, and when we feel love in our hearts instead of hatred, we can find happiness. Now onto Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. The last 2 Godzilla films had not made near the same amount as Godzilla vs. Mothra, and producer Shogo Tomiyama decided that it was time to bring this timeline of films to an end. This entire movie feels like a grand finale on a scale that is indescribable. It was not only the end for Godzilla, well, the Heisei Godzilla specifically, but the careers of 2 very special people who brought Godzilla to life. This would be the final film Tomoyuki Tanaka would ever produce. The man who made Godzilla possible in 1954 would be ending his career with the monster as well. One of Japan's most prolific producers, saying goodbye. But not just him. Akira Ifukube would be leaving as well. This film would be his final film score, and it is arguably one of the greatest film scores I have ever heard. Ifukube always did an amazing job of capturing the scale of these movies and making everything seem important and sometimes haunting and sometimes beautiful. Ifukube decided he had to come back. Since he was there at Godzilla's creation, he believed he should be there for his death. Ifukube created a new theme for Godzilla's death, different than the one he used in 1954. Ifukube described it as one of the hardest pieces he had ever created, because, in his own words, it was like composing the theme for his own death. Kenpachiro Satsuma would leave as well, this being the last time he played Godzilla. He was right in wishing that Toho would pay him more, since his job was very taxing and he almost died a time or 2 in the suit, but he truly brought this character to life in a way no one else had, always keeping Godzilla more animalistic and not human, but still making the monster relatable. And of course, that thanks goes to everyone who worked on puppeteering the model and those who designed and made it. No one person made Godzilla, but together, something truly special was made. By this time, Ishiro Honda, the director of the original film, had passed away, right around the time of Godzilla vs. Mothra. Eiji Tsuburaya had passed away as well a long time ago, but his contributions in creating the monster and pushing special effects can never be forgotten. The Heisei films brought many new creators to the franchise, like Koichi Kawakita, who did a superb job as special effects director for the Heisei films starting with Biollante. I feel as if this film, though, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, marks the end of the original Godzilla. I mean, Godzilla, like anything, isn't very definable, but this is definitely a turning point. It was a mix of the old and the new, but most of the original creators would be out of the franchise after this film. So, enough of the history for now. Let's talk about the film. First, I want to talk about Mickey. In the last movie, which by the way revealed Mickey had telekinesis, Mickey uses said power to free Godzilla from his mind control, showing how she is not worried to straight up reject government orders for what she finds ethical. Obviously, there is an emphasis placed on this in the film as a good decision. But in this film, the choice isn't as easy. She is called up again to use her powers to lure Junior into a trap. We know she has a lot invested in Junior, as she spends the first half of the movie looking for him. She disagrees with this decision, but is forced to comply, especially with the world being at stake. She has developed a strong emotional connection to Godzilla, but she knows the end is nearing. She reveals to another psychic that her powers are beginning to fade. I like this about the movie and storytelling outside the US in general. Sad endings are allowed to happen, or at least not fully happy endings. It is alright to accept that an ending is sad, because ultimately, something is being lost, otherwise it isn't an ending. As the Heisei comes to a close, so do Mickey's powers. It is unfortunate, but it is the way of things. As we age, things we always have with us start to slip away. By the way, none of the Space Godzilla characters show up in this movie that I remember, but I imagine they are living their best lives. Anyway, there is a new monster introduced in this movie. For the most part, the Heisei films usually used already established monsters and gave them a modern twist. The new creations, the giant isopods in Godzilla Returns, Biollante, and Space Godzilla, are all of course unforgettable, but Destroya is something else. There is a reason they are the final boss of Godzilla, and why they have only appeared once. Destroya is a mutated organism that comes from the one thing that was able to kill Godzilla, the Oxygen Destroyer. Nice detail here, but I like that Destroya comes from a pre-Cambrian life form that didn't rely on oxygen. Hence why it didn't die from the Oxygen Destroyer. Anyway, it's an amazing dichotomy. Destroya and Godzilla both being the consequences of man created more and more devastating weapons, creating unintended consequences capable of destroying ourselves, one fictional and one all too real, both reinforcing this theme. However, even in all of this, the real-life consequences of splitting the atom are given more gravitas in this film, to the point that Destroya is a side threat, which in my opinion just makes the movie even better. What I mean by this is that Godzilla is overheating and will soon enter a meltdown. When this happens, his nuclear material will descend to the core of the Earth and end the world. This creates a dilemma, because the only known way to stop Godzilla is the Oxygen Destroyer, which a scientist is on the verge of recreating. But there is someone alive who remembers the pain and turmoil that the original weapon caused, and she refuses to see it brought back again. This character, of course, is Emiko, a protagonist from all the way back in the original 1954 film. She implores her niece and nephew to prevent the recreation of this weapon. Quick side note, but I believe Emiko is the only Showa character in the Heisei films. Ogata's actor was still alive and active at this point, so I don't know why he wasn't involved. We can assume that either Emiko and Ogata's relationship never worked out after Serizawa's death, or maybe Ogata had since passed away in this timeline. She does still live in the home that was her father's, so I don't know what that implies. Anyway, it is very welcome to have her back. And speaking of ends, this was Momoko Kochi's final acting role, from being a relatively new actor from the original to retiring at the end. Godzilla is a fierce franchise for sure, surviving longer than most of the careers of the people who worked on it. Extra side note here, but if you are morbidly curious and wondering if there is an actor from the original Godzilla film that's still alive, there is. His name is Kenji Sahara, and he is 92. He had a very brief role in the original, being an extra that gets his day interrupted by the emergence of Godzilla, but he does show up in many succeeding Showa films, even leading a few, like Rodan. He plays the character Minister Segawa that shows up in 3 Heisei films. He isn't in this one, however, but he would return for the Millennium run of these movies too. So would Ogata's actor, Akira Takarada. Kenji Sahara would retire in 2013, it seems. That's just a fun fact. This movie was the end of Godzilla for everybody. Anyway, back on topic, the original Godzilla isn't just an allegory for the nuclear bombs. It serves as a warning as well. The A-bombs were what were dropped on Japan, but Godzilla's inspiration came from the even more foreboding H-bombs. The Oxygen Destroyer was the next step. Humanity was created increasingly worse weapons that would only become more cruel and terrifying in scale. The Oxygen Destroyer reflects this fear, showing a terrible death that befalls those who come in contact with it. It's a very visceral image, and remains some of the strongest imagery in Godzilla's history. This is why Dr. Serizawa did everything in his power to make sure it would never be revealed to the world, because he knew it would be used. He used his weapon only once, to rid the world of Godzilla, but as Yamane proclaimed, as long as H-bomb testing continues, then somewhere in the world, another Godzilla may return. In this timeline, that Godzilla would emerge 30 years later. And by this movie, the events of what happened still haunt Emiko. While her niece and nephew are very fond of her, we see that the events of 1954 still define how Emiko sees the world. As such, she carries Dr. Serizawa's wish with her, that the oxygen destroyer never be used again. The counter-argument is that the oxygen destroyer must be brought back in order to stop Godzilla, as Godzilla will destroy the Earth if his meltdown is allowed to happen. Then that makes it clear. The oxygen destroyer, regrettably, has to be brought back, only it doesn't. An alternate mean is found. At the end of the movie, high-tech freeze rays are used to cool Godzilla's meltdown and prevent the destruction of the world. The radiation is still high in the immediate area, but the oxygen destroyer is not brought back. Essentially the same worry is brought up again as in the first movie, that the oxygen destroyer must be deployed because of the threat of Godzilla, except this film rejects it completely. I mean, think of the parallels. In the day, the creation of the atomic bomb was seen as a required move to end the war. At its conception, just to clear the air because I know I should, Japan did not need to be hit by the nuclear bomb. For one, a land invasion was not yet imminent. The Allies were content with a continued blockade for the time being. Plus, Japan was defeated at the end of the war. It was just a matter of when they would surrender. And maybe they would have surrendered earlier if, the guy who has the power to make that call is given some confirmation that his life will be spared if he surrenders. It wasn't until after 2 nuclear bombs and a Soviet invasion, and then a note implying the Emperor's continued survival, that Emperor Hirohito surrendered. Just have to say that. But anyway, the idea was still out there. Save the world by creating a bomb that can end it. But Godzilla vs. Destroy It tells you that it is ultimately not worth it. That we didn't have to create the oxygen destroyer. That we didn't have to build a nuclear bomb. We could have found alternate means. There is no apology here. It simply states that the creation of the nuclear bomb was not worth it, and I find it pretty powerful that this movie stands by that declaration, and then shows that in the future, we should stop ourselves from creating more worse bombs and not use the same things we used to excuse ourselves last time. When we have become so preoccupied with building bigger weapons to win, we fail to realize that we have all lost. I really appreciate this film at the end of the day. There really is no other Godzilla film like it, especially in how it so seamlessly connects with the original, going back to the beginning for the end, to reconnect the themes of Godzilla to the new and almost unrecognizable landscape of Japan in the modern day. I really love the reintroduction of the Yamane family. It's nice to know Shinkichi grew up and was able to have a life after the events of the 1954 film. Anyway, the Yamane siblings are a fun addition to the family. Obviously, they don't live through the same trauma of what happened in 1954, so they are way less gloomy than Emiko, but that is what you want, for the younger generations to not have to live through it. And the weight and importance of the oxygen destroyer is very much appreciated. Its reintroduction is treated with the proper respect that such a terrifying weapon should have. I find it really fascinating how in the Toho films, the oxygen destroyer has really never been recreated. I mean, we do see a replica in Gando's office in Biollante, but that's it. The importance of the weapon is enhanced in how little of it we get. Speaking of Biollante, Major Sho Kuroki returns as well in this film, and so does General Aso too. What always gets me, speaking of which, is that Godzilla's death never loses its emotional impact. No matter how many times I see it, the music, the dark backdrop, the flashing of the lights, it always hits the same. Kuroki's reaction at the sheer radiation of Godzilla makes it feel real. And then throughout this whole movie, you just feel Dr. Serizawa's presence as how important of a character he is to this franchise, and how his legacy and Yamane's has really carried on through the years. It's such a beautiful retrospective of this never-ending fighting between humanity and Godzilla. And what's more, even a character like General Aso doesn't even celebrate when faced with the image of the dying Godzilla. He squints his eyes as the dying Godzilla emits a bright light. The tone is somber, and Tokyo becomes a nuclear wasteland. Miki has tears in her eyes and says that her work with Godzilla is finished, and she gets ready to move on. Just before the movie ends, though, it is revealed that Junior survived the battle, and then takes the radiation, saving Tokyo, and transforming him into an adult Godzilla, showing the monster is never gone. Anyway, that is it for the Heisei films, and they never made another Godzilla movie ever again.